Hello, if you're watching this, you either work shift work or maybe you have a loved one that works shift work and you're interested in learning a little bit more. I published this thesis back in 2025, so the research is very relevant and is probably still relevant today since they don't really research this topic. I'll talk more about that in a second. Here's a link if you want to check it out for yourself. It's a good read, some good information in there. So what made me do my thesis on this topic? Well, I have always worked shift work. I got my first job at 13 at a pizza place. I would take the bus and hop off the bus at work and go to work that night and weekends. And then I did that all through high school, so for 5 years. I bought my first car at 14, so it paid off. I was an automotive mechanic for a lot of years, but I also had to waitress and bartend to pay the bills. So I would work all day in the garage and then go waitress and bartend at night, go back to the garage in the morning and on weekends. I also fueled planes for a little while. That was a lot of fun. I have been assembling aircraft engines for over 17 years now. And during that time, I also got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree in psychology and my master's in industrial organizational psychology. So essentially the human aspect of business, how people function in a business setting. And during that time, I also took my health coach accreditation and started my own business. So I was doing that as well as working shift work. It was a men's mental health. As you can imagine, that was a hard sell. There's still a big gap between wanting help and actually getting help. So I am still currently assembling aircraft engines and have recently gone to a day shift. So I am extremely happy about being back in the land of the living. A little bit about my thesis. I read over 1900 articles. I excluded animal research because it was going to be too much to include. I also excluded any research published before 2014, so it was all fairly recent. Ended up being 63 pages in total with the references included. And we discuss biological females and males, so science-based facts on how the body and brain react to night shift. Here are the chapters that I have throughout the thesis. So there's several different diseases and disorders. I look at, cognitive health, mental health, reproductive health, cancer, but I'm also including some protective factors at the end. So some things that we can do to prevent the impact of shift work. Unfortunately, shift work is essential for the world to go around, right? We have shift work in manufacturing, where I am, healthcare, first responders, transportation, and 16% of the world's employees are doing shift work. It's roughly the same between men and women. Of course, women make up more of the healthcare fields, men and more in manufacturing and transportation. Especially in aviation, there is a lot of men. Women are not well represented in aviation. It's slowly getting better, but we're still about 6%. There are lots of different things that come up that impact the research in my thesis. So there's different schedule types. So there's rotating, night shift, length, recovery time. They all talk about those kind of things. There's also industry type, manual labor, and work environment. So that all impacts the results of the research on shift work. For the general public, females are more at risk of all these diseases and disorders listed here. Anyways, shift work just amplifies those risks. So things that can also increase the risk are different neurological, biological, social, and career choices. That, it's not a blanket thing for everybody. Everybody's risk is different. But these are definitely categories that can impact that risk. Some of the things that females working shift work may experience is taking more sleeping pills, more job stress, more emotional problems, and more feelings of sleepiness. I am there, absolutely, all the time, unfortunately. So 44% of females suffer from poorer sleep quality than males. That's general public. And 20% of the research on circadian rhythm disruption includes females. So the research, again, they don't really care about females all that much and how we sleep. Again, it's getting better, but it's research has been male dominated for years and years. So I had difficulties finding research on sleep quality in females and shift work. That was a major issue, but I managed to find some good quality research out of the 1900 articles. So the first disorder I look at is shift work disorder. So it's a thing. Lots of people don't know about it. So some of the symptoms are sleepiness or insomnia. It has to last for 3 months of working and leisure days. So it has to include leisure days as well. And it's not attributed to any other health conditions going on. In shift works, it is extremely prevalent at 30%. The general population only suffers, 6% of them only suffer from shift work disorder. And some may never recover, unfortunately, when they go back to a day shift schedule. I hope that is not the case for myself. But often when people have worked so long and go into retirement, if they work shift work for years, it's very, very hard to switch back. Your brain is just stuck in that mode. So the next disease I talk about is the big C, cancer. Shift work should be classified as group 2A, a possible carcinogen, according to the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Your risk of dying of cancer goes up if you work shift work. Cancer risk increases 3.2% for every 5 years that you work. So here I am working shift work most of my life. And possible factors are listed here. So light at night's a possible reason. Decreased gene methylation, increased cell aging. They're not really 100% sure on what causes it. And this risk is for everybody, not just females. And yes, men can get breast cancer. All shift workers have an increased risk of 2.9%. Rotating shifts further increases that to 5.3%. More than 10 years is 8.6%, and the longer hours you work in a day, so I work 12 hours right now, and menopause and body fat also increases that risk. So, yay. Cardiometabolic disorders, so there's a bunch of them. They're all kind of umbrellaed under that term, including cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome or METS, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. So I go into each one on the next few slides. Starting with cardiovascular disease, it is the leading cause of death for both males and females in the US, which is pretty crazy. Shift work increases that risk by 3.2%. Shift work increases, again, more than 10 years, more than roughly 3 to 8 night shifts a month. It increases your risk. And menopausal women, their risk is increased. So the sex differences in there are how we recover from cardiac arrest, vascular inflammatory responses from sleep loss, heart rate variability, and stress coping mechanisms. So females and males deal with those things differently, which can increase or decrease your risk. The next thing we talk about is METS. And shift workers, they have more of a twofold risk of developing METS. And the risk is further increased by being socially deprived, which shift workers are, eating later, longer hours, previous gestational diabetes, aging females, females taking antidepressants, if you work over 4 years, more than 4 years of shift work, and just being female. Yay! There was an interesting study that I talk about. So even the hunger and satiety hormones are different for men and women shift workers. So the study showed that ghrelin did not change for men overnight. And they also had increased cravings for savory and energy-rich foods, whereas females, the leptin decreased over 24 hours and ghrelin increased during wake cycles. So we become hungry during our wake cycles. And decreased carb oxidation, so that means we didn't break down our carbs, and then increased lipid oxidation. So these are just some, just shows that females and males are operating differently when working shift work. Type 2 diabetes, shift workers have an increased risk of 10%, and that risk is higher in females. Years of exposure and schedule type only impact females' risk. Interesting. Rotating shift work and night shifts also increase the risk. And healthcare workers versus civilian workers in manual labor, there's a different risk in there. And then also unhealthy lifestyle factors. So if you don't eat well, you don't exercise, that's going to increase your risk, obviously. That's for everybody, not just shift workers. So 17.7 million more males and females have type 2 diabetes in the world. But females are often labeled insulin resistant instead of having type 2 diabetes. So they're not under the same category. So it could be, it could be closer. But if you work shift work and you're female, your risk is increased. Going into a little bit more about type 2 diabetes, females increase their risk through high stress and low decision latitude, meaning they don't have much control over their tasks or their schedule at work. Men decrease their risk through high work demands and physical tasks, interestingly enough. And at the bottom there, low SES, being a minority, low education level, and occupation status will actually increase your risk of type 2 diabetes as well. The next thing I look at in my thesis is obesity. There's actually an inverse correlation with females and increased income and obesity. So as their income increases, their obesity goes down. It is not the same for males. Interestingly enough, in another study, Brazilian night shift workers, they saw that work-related stress increased obesity 71% in females. There's no relationship for males. And low SES, low education, occupational status, being a minority, again, all four of these are related to obesity, as well as having childhood obesity can obviously increase your risk as an adult. A little more on obesity. A study found that night shift increased BMI and central obesity, so around the waist, versus day shift workers. Shift workers had a 3 times higher rate of abdominal obesity, as well as middle management, blue collar workers, those over 50, those who work more than 9 hours a day, and again, more than 5 years of shift work exposure. We're seeing a pattern here. We're done with cardiometabolic disorders, on to reproductive health. So shift working females can experience things like infertility, early spontaneous miscarriages, early menopause, small infant growth, decreased fecundability, and that is the probability of getting pregnant within a cycle. That risk is further decreased if a female is Black. Males also experience things like poor semen parameters, decreased sperm count, decreased sperm quality, increased risk of prostate cancer, and they are responsible for 50% of infertility. Shift workers need to worry about their nutrition, their health, their sleep, and males can cause miscarriages 50% of the time, not just shift working males, but all males. So it's very important that males look after their health when they're, when they're trying to get pregnant with their spouse. It's super important, but shift workers, extra important. Interestingly enough, in 2024, the United States passed the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So I'm just going to read it. The law requires a covered employer to provide a reasonable accommodation to the qualified employees or applicants' known limitations related to, affected by, or arising out of pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions, unless the accommodation will cause the employer undue hardship. So essentially, you just have to accommodate the person, the employee that's pregnant, Unfortunately, this does not apply to men, so there's still some work to do there to understand that men's health is very important as well when getting pregnant. I look at studies on osteoporosis for both male and females. Shift workers have hypovitaminosis D, decreased bone density, worse in female shift workers, increased bone loss, again, worse in female shift workers. The risk factors, if you're a female over 50 and work night shift, if you're male over 50 plus harmful lifestyles. So if you're just 50 and you're male working over shift work, osteoporosis probably not increased. And then rotating shifts is also a risk factor. Males with osteoporosis, though, have a higher risk of secondary or mortality from osteoporosis, so that's kind of scary. There is also less public awareness surrounding men and osteoporosis, so it's still a thing. It's a thing with shift workers. Men should be, worried about their osteoporosis health as well. Your cognitive health is definitely impacted by shift work. There's been some interesting things that I've done. I'm basically impaired when you're not getting enough sleep. It can increase your stress, fatigue-related impairment, and it's similar to drugs and alcohol. Rotating shifts, so 5 to 7 days, there's more accidents. Rotating shifts 2 to 3 days is a better option, according to the National Safety Council. Less than 5 hours of sleep in 24 hours equals impairment. You are impaired. And this is very, very common in shift workers to get less than 5 hours. So that decreases your brain function, your memory, your mood, attention, learning, and your accuracy and speed of tasks. I call myself Spicy Kaylee when I am on shift because lack of sleep equals no bueno. Some interesting stats on accidents. So accidents are 3 times higher, even outside of work hours. Workplace injuries go up during night shift, especially on 12 hours and quick turnarounds. Those increase accidents. Motor vehicle accidents and shift workers are 2.42% higher risk in these accidents. And this risk goes up to 5.89% if you're over 65 and you're still doing shift work. Females have more workplace accidents at night. Daytime accidents are the same for both sexes. So again, shift work impacting females and not males in this category. Females have more cognitive impairment and performance. Impaired cognitive performance is higher than males. So we're more impaired. Worse following a 12-hour shift and rotating shifts. We have more difficulty with that. And unfortunately, 6+ years of exposure to shift work increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease. Driving while you're tired is impaired. You're impaired. 5 to 6 hours of sleep is comparable to 0.08 of blood alcohol level. 4 hours of sleep is the same as 0.12 or 0.15% of blood alcohol level. 24 hours of being awake, that is similar to 0.1% of blood alcohol. And 20% of fatal collisions in Canada involves a fatigued driver. So that's quite a bit. And, commuting back and forth to work, we're all struggling there. It's not very safe. Thanks for sticking with me. More facts to come on my interesting thesis on shift work. So loss of sleep can definitely increase mental health issues. Sleeping is super important for removing toxins and recharging and solidifying memories. So if you're not getting adequate sleep, your brain can't do that. That's a super important function of sleep. REM is down-regulating recurring intrusive memories. So if you're not getting enough REM sleep, that's where PTSD and anxiety can increase. And mind after midnight. So there's a theory on what your brain does after midnight. So we're evolutionarily wired to concentrate more on the bad thoughts after midnight. Increased aggression, risk-taking, substance abuse. Spicy Kaylee. Crimes, murder, sexual assault, violence all occur in early hours normally. And drug use, overdose, and suicide also occur in the general public, also with shift workers. Talking more about mental health because that's my favorite topic. Shift workers experience 32% more depression and psychological issues. There's a higher prevalence of anxiety and depression in shift workers. When looking at the difference between males and females, sleep deprivation in males does not affect the mental health of young, healthy males. The males that are depressed, it's usually following work that they feel more depressed. And the statistics for females are very sad. 47% common mental disorders among shift work females, 147% poor sleep quality. That is mind-boggling to me and also explains a lot why I'm tired all the time. That's, if your wife says that she needs more sleep, it's true. And 70% depression increased risk in shift working females. So we need to look out for each other. One particular study looked at police officers and shift work. They found that in female police officers, there was more anxiety, panic attacks, and major depression. However, their perception of a strong support system did decrease this symptoms. So if they know that people have their back, that helps them. Men police workers, shift workers, did tolerate shift work better. However, they had more alcohol abuse. So it's very difficult. Police officers have a rough job. I volunteer for victim services in my city, and the officers here are wonderful humans and they care. It's a very difficult job, and they are heroes. They're definitely heroes in my eyes. Another slide on mental health. Evening and rotating shifts are less tolerable. Night shifts are unhealthy and dangerous. Unstable shifts equal unhappiness and psychological distress, so work-life balance difficulties happen there. Quality of life is impacted. It's difficult to maintain relationships and, participate among the living. Inconsistencies with exercise and nutrition. You don't have energy to do either of those, and missing out on life events. And you can't have an extracurricular activity every Monday night because you'll miss most of them. Finally, some protective factors, some good stuff that's going to help decrease your risk. So having a good support system, even the perception of a good support system. Proper nutrition, exercise, not smoking, doing drugs or alcohol, that's, good for everybody, not just shift workers. The way a worker perceives their work environment can actually decrease symptoms. So resilience, social support, and organizational support. Knowing that your company has your back. Low sleep languidity and morningness. So if you're a morning person like me, and if you're not groggy in the morning, that actually can decrease your symptoms as well. Legislative changes. So Italy, interestingly enough, has put shift work under a category that is arduous and hazardous. They have increased wages and early retirement for shift workers. So come on, Canada, let's get on that. This one strategy I'd never heard of before doing this study called sleep banking. The idea is to get a bunch of sleep prior to going into your shift work. You try and get 9 hours, 3 consecutive nights. Easier said than done. We might need sleeping pills. Most people use sleeping pills to switch back. It might be advantageous to do it beforehand and build up your sleep before going into nights. Napping is also a solid strategy in this. I try and nap before shift work all the time just to get through the nights. And then you transition early by 2 hours each night to line up with your new shift schedule. There's a thing that most shift workers experience called social jet lag. It's the difference between sleep cycles during your work days and your days off. And your chronotype is early bird or night owl. That matters. And your social clock and obligations dictate our wake schedule. So if you have kids or dogs that like to wake you up early, that's going to impact this. Shift workers are forced to replenish sleep debt during the periods that they don't match their chronotype. So if you're an early bird, then, shift work's going to be tougher, and to replenish that is going to be more difficult. Exposure to light at night disrupts your circadian rhythm. In my thesis, I go on and on about how the brain works in each one of these disorders and how the body is affected. I didn't go on in that here. You can, read it in my thesis if you really want to know more about all the science behind this, all the things that I mentioned. The shift type, so median social jet lag for shift workers 3 hours. With permanent night shift workers is 5 hours. Rotational shift workers within a 12-hour schedules is the highest, plus sleep debt is 3 or 4 hours a day, plus the impact of sleep characteristics. It requires 1 to 1.5 days to recover from a 1 hour of social jet lag. So that is crazy to me that, but it, again, explains a lot about why I feel the way I do right now. The type of shift that you work is huge. It matters with cancer, fatigue, injuries, and other psychological disorders and diseases were all decreased with fewer night shifts, shift intervals of more than 11 hours between, night shifts no longer than 9 hours, no quick returns to day shift, reduced workload, rest and relaxation were facilitated, napping always encouraged, and reduced years of exposure of shift work, that's a common theme. Flexibility of workers over 50. We need to give them extra work-life balance. Miscarriages were also reduced if the females were not working more than 1 night shift a week. So miscarriages were definitely increased among night shift working pregnant women. We made it to the end. All right. The conclusion? Shift work absolutely impacts females more negatively than males. However, the research is still lacking, and it needs to be more specific around schedule types, industry, hours, tenure, personal characteristics, job conditions, and there are other factors that need to be more standard across the research of shift work. I'm not saying that women should not work shift work. That's not what this thesis is about. I wish that I had been more educated before I made my career choice. And I wish that any female going into healthcare, policing, any of these manufacturing, any of these jobs that have shift work, they should have all the information prior to making that career choice. They should have all the, protective factors as well. Also, workplaces should have better support systems for health and well-being of shift workers. I think workplaces could do much better in helping shift workers be better at their jobs, healthier, and not develop any of these dangerous things that can come along, and allow them to have a better work-life balance and choose a better shift structure. And if someone's tired and tells you that they haven't slept, let them go home. Let them use their, holiday times if they need to. Everybody experiences and goes through shift work differently. Some people love it. Some people love night shift. I don't, but they can handle it. And the other ones that aren't handling it so well, maybe they need to look at different ways to help themselves. There's always choices. You always have a choice. So thanks for sticking with me. Thank you for sticking with me. Here's my email if you want to reach out and discuss this more, or if you want the scientific underpinnings of all the diseases and disorders and shift work information, we can discuss that. Mind Mechanic was my business, your brain maintenance specialist. I combine my unique skill set to try and help people. So yeah, reach out if you want to talk more. Okay, take care, everyone.